A lot of beginner photographers send me their work to critique. There's normally lots of points to go through, but there's one problem that crops up in almost everyone's photographic work when they start out, and I know it did in mine. Because when we go out to take a photo, the world is already there, and it's our job as photographers to capture a part of it. We start with 360 degrees, and we need to edit it down, because photography is in part a process of removing everything that we don't need in the frame. And this is where a lot of beginners' work falls down. There's often too much stuff in the shot, too much distraction, and this leads to shots that lack both aesthetic and narrative focus. And I completely understand the mentality of not wanting to exclude things. It's more difficult than it sounds to let things go. I'm sure we've all been in that position where we travel somewhere with a breathtaking view and we wanted to capture all of it with a wide lens, and we want to showcase just how stunning this vista is. However, the way we experience reality and the way we interact with photography are two distinctly different things. Shooting an amazing view with a wide lens will generally not work as well as taking a longer lens and selecting a section of that view to make a composition with. So, what are some good methods that you can employ to refine your shots and to make them cleaner and more tonally focused? Robert Capa famously said, "If your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough." While I appreciate this sentiment, it's not always strictly true, because there are many ways to simplify and refine your shots. So, let me take you through a few different ways to remove some of the distracting elements and factors from your shots. Now, the last one is a little controversial, but I'll try to approach it in a purely instructional way rather than a morally didactic one. So here are 9 tips to help you create more refined shots. Number 1, use a longer focal length, or just getting closer. Using a longer focal length is sometimes viewed as an easier form of photography. I don't buy this at all, because it seems to me that when you use a longer lens, you have to make a lot more decisions about what your frame consists of. It's much more a case of making an image than maybe capturing one. And both wider and close-in approaches need a lot of skill to make a striking image. It's just that the approach takes a slightly different skill set to master. Take, for example, the work of photographer Craig Whitehead, aka 6 Street Under. When we think of street photography, it's common to think of scenes shot on wide lenses, 28mm, 35mm, the work of Gary Winogrand, Joel Meyerowitz, Alex Webb, Bruce Gilden. But there are also plenty of street photographers who don't take this approach, and Craig Whitehead is one of these. He tends to shoot on an 85mm lens or a 50mm lens, but a bit closer in, because it's more than just the lens you use, it's also how you use it. Whitehead's work on a 50mm, for example, looks very different to the work of Helen Levitt, who also shot on a 50mm. His work has a very clean and striking aesthetic. He employs multiple techniques to achieve this. He keeps the amount of elements in his compositions minimal, and he focuses in closely on details. He creatively crops and obscures part of his frame, forcing the viewer to consider the shot in a more abstract way. While his shots are often bursting with colour, that colour is controlled. His palettes are kept minimal and balanced. He's also not afraid to let large areas of his shots fall into deep black shadow or into obscurity. Don't always avoid complete darkness or non-recognition in your shots. You can expose your image so that areas fall into shadow or out of focus if they're not an important part of the image. Shadows, blurred objects in the foreground, areas of flat colour, these can all be pivotal elements in helping you balance your shot and focusing your viewer's attention. Craig Whitehead's street photography work is very much about creating artworks from elements on the street, rather than documenting people and events. Using a tighter focal length and getting in closer can help you get into the mindset where you're being more selective with what you put in and what you leave out of your shots. Number 2, go black and white. As well as getting in closer to remove unnecessary clutter from your shot, you can also remove factors such as colour. If you shoot black and white, you reduce everything down to just light and dark. And as black and white is a step further away from reality than colour is, it gives you a little more license to push your image's abstract qualities. And it also gives you a little more license to work with your images in post. You can get away with slightly harsher editing, edits that may look overly processed on a colour image. You have more scope to dodge and burn, but you still should be careful not to overdo it because it's an easy mistake to make, especially if you're new to photography. A great example of minimalist compositions are the self-portraits of artist Noelle Oswald. Always working in black and white, Oswald juxtaposes semi-abstract images of her body against precise geometric shapes and landscapes. She allows large areas of her images to fall into dark black, while simultaneously keeping the tones soft with smooth textures. This results in compositions that exude a harmonious simplicity, whilst also having an evocative and atmospheric quality. Number 3, use long exposures. On the subject of textures, long exposures can also help remove clutter from your images, because with a long enough shutter speed, things like water textures and skies can become very smooth. Moving objects can vanish. I find an exposure of around 4 minutes to be a good length to get something like sitting water to become perfectly smooth. Obviously, shorter exposures work when the water's moving. It's also possible to make people and traffic vanish. I made a whole video on this, so check that out on my channel for a deep dive into long exposures. 4, use colour. So in contrast to the black and white approach, colour can also be used to simplify a composition, and this can be done by finding scenes with a selective range of hues, by tweaking and boosting colours in post, or ideally a mixture of both. A great example of this is the work of photographer Preet Uday. Going under the handle of simply Preet or Visuals by Preet on Instagram, Preet has a very distinctive approach to his use of colour. Working under the philosophy that there are photographs to be made everywhere, and even the simplest of scenes holds their own beauty, Preet's images are minimal and striking and bursting with saturated colour. Through a mixture of selective compositions and post-processing, his colour palettes, while bold and striking, are minimal and balanced. His images have a warm, nostalgic feel to them. Another thing to note here is that he is a Dubai-based photographer who takes his influence from the city around him. His images are very specific to the climate, architecture, aesthetics and landscape of Dubai. It's important to take inspiration from the subject that you're shooting and not try to make something it's not. I love Preet's work, but it would be difficult for me to try and emulate his style here in the UK. Find the aesthetic that works for what you're shooting. Number 5, change your angle or your position. Another photographer who works in bold colour in a very different way is Petra Leary. Using a drone, she captures mesmerising views from above. Her rigid, geometric approach to her compositions gives us a new perspective on often familiar things. She says that the most boring things that you can walk past are sometimes the most interesting things when you see them from top down. Tennis courts, basketball courts, and other sporting environments feature prominently in her portfolio. Her work turns these everyday spaces into beautiful, abstract tapestries of shapes and colour. She often employs the use of harsh shadows to add some more figurative elements to her semi-abstract images. Number 6, use repetition and pattern. While these colourful abstractions form a large part of her portfolio, her work extends beyond just sporting venues. And one thing that really struck me about her drone work is how much closer in she frames her shots than typical aerial work that we're used to seeing. She shoots in close. She keeps her compositions clean, highlighting repetition and pattern and geometric form. We can also see an example of this in Craig Whitehead's work. Repetition of colour, repetition of objects. But it's not just about repetition of elements, but also repetition in terms of visual themes, like how the stripes of this person's hoodie mirror the stripes of the background. Repetition is a great way to eliminate clutter from your shots. Repeated elements create a cleaner aesthetic than many different things put together. Number 7, use negative space. So when we start learning photography, one of the key things we're taught right at the start is to fill the frame. And this comes back to Robert Capa's famous quote, and it's generally good advice. It's for exactly what I'm saying in this video. Cut out those bits that we don't need in order to tell the story we're trying to tell with our shots. But not all photography needs to be about depicting a subject. Sometimes subjects can be used to create an image that's about the composition as a whole. Photography we can appreciate in an abstract way, maybe where we look more at shape and at colour and form and balance. Craig Whitehead's work is also full of images like this. Images where he's utilised texture, pattern, colour or shadow to frame a subject or to create a sense of balance. Consider how much more conventional some of these shots would look if that negative space wasn't here. They would be perfectly fine, but the framing and cropping techniques he's employed makes the shots considerably more engaging. Large areas of negative space can also imbue an image with a more peaceful and calm feeling. Subjects have room to breathe and to be. It can make the world around us feel more spacious and less chaotic. The larger the area of negative space, the more insignificant and small humanity can feel, and this can be used in both a disconcerting and in a liberating way, depending on the context. So look for subjects that have negative space around them. Large empty walls, pavements, roads, coloured shutters and hoardings, large areas of sky. And this is a lot easier to do if you're using something like a longer lens, because you can compress perspective of elements such as stairs. If your subject is surrounded by a crowded scene, you can always create negative space by obscuring part of the foreground. You can shoot through something, a gap in a bus shelter, a window, or you can shoot around a pillar or a wall, or past other people and objects. You can use anything really. You can blur these elements out to make them indistinguishable, and you can draw emphasis to your subject that way. Number 8, crop your images in post. So these days, digital cameras have such high resolutions that it's often possible to crop quite severely in post. You'd be surprised how few megapixels you need. I used to shoot weddings for clients and I shot them on a 5D Classic, and that was 12 megapixels, and that was perfectly fine. So never be afraid to crop your photos down in post, because some of the greatest photography of all time is great largely because it was cropped. Arnold Newman's famous shot of Stravinsky at the piano is only so striking because of how much he cropped the image in the darkroom. Elliot Erwitt's famous shot of the small dog next to the pair of feet is a fantastic image, but it's only so good because of the way he cropped it. Sometimes there are great photos hidden inside a busy photo. And I've said this before in other videos, but the more you practice cropping in post, the better you will get at getting the composition right in camera. Number 9, the dark arts. Photoshopping stuff out. So I know this is a highly contentious topic, and it's one that tends to divide people. Steve McCurry's use of photoshopping out objects and people created a lot of debate, for example. So for me, it's totally about context, but we all have our own ethics and value systems. and I've made a whole video on this subject, so I'm going to stick purely to the practical side here. Now, I should preface this by saying that you should always try to get it right in camera. There is no better way. But also, don't hold yourself back just because a stray distracting element crept into your shot and spoiled the balance. Photoshop's clone brushes, healing brushes, remove tool, generative AI, all those features are there for precisely this reason. So let me take you through a few tips on how best to remove objects from your shots. Despite the recent rise of AI tech, removing objects from photos is far from a new endeavour for photographers. Dorothea Lange's iconic migrant mother shot had a distracting hand retouched out in the darkroom. I will, however, be using AI remove tools for these examples simply because it's quicker. I can do all this stuff without AI, but it would take me 20 times as long, so why would I? So let's start with this portrait I took at Pride this summer. Now, this person walking through the background, I find quite a distracting element. I think it would be a stronger shot if they weren't there. So I'm going to select them with the selection brush in Photoshop and click Generative Fill. I'll leave the prompt blank. So remember to include shadows and reflections when you select something to remove, because AI can detect these subtle details and will often generate something in the element's place rather than removing it. And there we go. So while it's crucial to do as much as you can in camera, you'll often find yourself in situations where you can't always control what's in the frame, especially events where you need to be very quick, such as weddings. This is a shot I quickly grabbed of a bride getting out of a car for a ceremony, but unfortunately she stood right in front of this very distracting flag and it appears to be coming out of her head. So I'll just select it and remove it. Now, if we add it back in again, it looks really weird. Sometimes it's good to blur your eyes and see what jumps out at you in a shot. It's a good way of identifying the distracting elements. It's also good to try and keep the edges quite clean. So with this shot here of an Extinction Rebellion protest, I find this guy's high-vis jacket a little distracting, and also the person to the far left and to the far right of the frame I don't really like. So I'll select the high-vis jacket. I don't need to select the whole guy. It'll probably just give him a regular jacket and it'll blend in more with the crowd. And I'll just remove those people that are just creeping in at the edges of the frame. And there we go. And that just focuses the shot just a little bit more for me. Sometimes you get very little control over your composition. You can't even control where you're standing. So I was in town not too long ago and suddenly the Queen Consort just walked around the corner. So I quickly grabbed my phone and I managed to take a photo. However, from the position I was at, she's got people poking out the top of her head. So I'm just going to select these people and remove them, because I just want to focus the viewer's attention back on the main subject. And there we go. When it comes to removing elements using editing software, deciding where to draw your own personal ethical line is a very personal choice. It's important to balance authenticity with creativity while respecting different viewpoints. This stuff is only going to get easier and easier as AI technology improves. However, I would encourage you to avoid gatekeeping in favour of open discussion. It's important to remember that the world and art undergo massive changes. So we should be aiming to limit creativity as little as possible. So my advice here is to try all of these different approaches and to see which ones gel with you and your style and your methodology. And as I said at the start, having too many unnecessary elements and factors is the most common issue I see when reviewing people's photographic work. And the most important thing here really is to just be aware of it. When framing up your shot, be conscious of what adds to your shot and what isn't adding anything. And if it isn't adding anything, remove it. Reframe your shot, obscure it with foreground objects, physically remove it from the scene. And if you can't do anything about it, decide that you're going to Photoshop it out in post and try and take your shot with that in mind. Also learn not to be precious, especially if you're traveling somewhere or photographing something or someone special. Remember that what makes a good shot and what we experience in reality are two distinctly different things. And you can always get those safety shots out of the way anyway first if you want to. You can take those touristy shots, that wide shot of the whole vista, that straightforward portrait shot. And after you've got those safely, then that will give you a bit more license to be a bit more experimental. Expose so the shadows fall into dark black. Go in closer, frame the shot in an interesting way where the elements are half cropped out. Move your subject out of the centre, use a big area of negative space. You'd be surprised which of the shots you end up being most happy with. I'll see you next time.